Hey, happy Sunday evening, everybody. It's Graham Spicer here, and welcome to OpenMicVO, our little get together of 30 or 40 like minded voiceover actors on Sunday evenings, where we talk about a topic of interest to the general voiceover community. So glad you're here with us tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about business development. Anything to do with biz dev is on the agenda for tonight. So any questions you have about reaching out to clients directly? How about using LinkedIn or Facebook or other social media sites? What about casting sites? Any questions, any comments about the online casting sites? More than welcome tonight. It's wide open. Anything to do with getting more work is fair game for tonight. The usual three quick little rules that I want to run past you. First is please mute yourself if you're not actively participating in the conversation at that given moment. And you do that by clicking the little microphone icon in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom meeting ID window. If you would please make sure you keep yourself muted if you're not actively participating. I don't want to discourage you from unmuting yourself and asking questions or providing us with insights. Totally cool. But we just want to try and keep the background noise and feedback and echo to a minimum so that the rest of us can keep the conversation flowing as smoothly as possible. The second rule is be nice. This is meant to be a very positive and forward-looking forum, these Sunday night open mic VOs. So please, no negativity, no name calling, no disparaging remarks. Let's try and keep everything positive and forward-looking. Remember, to those of you who've been around a little while, that you were a brand new voice actor at one point in the past as well. And for those of you who are brand new, we're sure glad that you're here. And please remember, there's no such thing as a silly question. The third point that I want to make is please remember that OpenMicVO is recorded and posted to YouTube. And we do that because sometimes there's people who are interested in tonight's topic but couldn't actually be here live, and they want to be able to watch it at some point later in the week. And I also tend to go back and have a look and try and assess how things are going with the ability to use hindsight and to look at it and to assess, 2 or 3 days later. So please remember that it gets posted to YouTube, and therefore, if you're going to be sharing any information with us tonight, and I certainly want you to do so, just remember, if it's confidential, if it's proprietary in any way, that once the episode gets posted to YouTube, I don't have any control over where it ends up from there. So with those three quick rules tabled, let's move on. Tonight's topic is business development. Anything to do with business development is more than welcome. You can ask your questions live, preferably. Just unmute yourself once I've had a chance to go through and unmute all the attendees. If you're shy, type your question in the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to ask it on your behalf. So let's go. And I'm going to start unmuting people. Just remember, this takes me a second. Once you see you're unmuted, if you could please mute yourself, that would be awesome. Unless, of course, you're going to be the first to ask a question tonight. Again, once you see that you're unmuted, if you want to get us started, that would be awesome.
Hello, Graham. It's JD.
Hey, JD, we can barely hear you.
I'm driving in. I'm not going to get much better than this.
Well, we're glad you're here with us tonight.
Thank you. I thought I would throw out a question to the more experienced voice actors out there and get some insight. I recently worked on a video game where my character was downgraded, or actually I was downgraded to a different character with less content. And I negotiated with the company for a lower rate because I ended up doing 5 lines out of 75. But I'd like to hear some opinions or experience of other more successful, more seasoned pros to hear how they would have handled that situation.
So let me see if I can understand the question and paraphrase it, mostly because many of us have probably had trouble understanding you because of the connection. So you were originally contracted to do 75 lines in a video game and for a particular character. At some point during the video game production, you weren't that character anymore. You were a minor character with far fewer lines, and you're trying to negotiate the pricing. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay. I know little about video games because I've never done one. Is there anyone online with us tonight that might have some insight into this particular question? Anybody have any thoughts on that? We'll give it another second here. Still trying to unmute people. Lots of attendees tonight. That's great to see. There's a few of you who I can't unmute, and let me explain to you why. It's because you're not using the latest version of the Zoom application. You haven't downloaded the latest version of the Zoom application and using it on your desktop. So if you find that you are not unmuted, it's because I can't unmute you. You're going to have to exit the webinar, go to the zoom.us website and download and install the latest version of the software, and then come on back in, log back in, and then I'll be able to unmute you. Okay, everybody's unmuted that I can unmute. We're going to table JD's question for now because it doesn't seem like and I'm looking at the list of attendees and there's no one here that kind of immediately indicates, like there's no one here that I recognize as being active in the video game space. So let's table that question for now. Who else has got a question for us tonight on business development, getting new business, negotiating rates for new business? Anyone with some fresh and interesting ideas on how to go about business development? Would love to hear from you. Just a couple of comments via the chat box for JD. First from David, my suggestion, let it be, not a big deal. Take the lower rate for a lesser role because it helps to maintain a good relationship with the production company. I think that's great advice. From Steve, who says, possibly your voice character, like the character itself, not necessarily you, but the writing for the character changed in the middle of the recording, and maybe they heard your voice and it wasn't as suitable any longer for the way the character has differently evolved. Take the downgrade is Steve's advice, and again, just in the interest of maintaining a great relationship with that particular production company. I mean, it is what it is, and doesn't mean that you won't get a great role in the next video game that video production company might be producing.
Hi, Graham. I have a question about that, though. I'm thinking of it from a union standpoint, of course, because I'm in SAG-AFTRA. There are rules set about that kind of thing, and if JD actually recorded the material and they didn't use it, it's like an actor winding up on the cutting room floor. They got paid anyway.
Right. You know what? That's a great point, James. And again, JD, you might want to think about that. If you actually had gone through the process and recorded those original 75 lines, then you probably should get paid something for that.
Well, here's what happened. I hope you can hear me better now.
Much better. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I just took off my Bluetooth. What happened was I recorded about, I would say, maybe 25 lines, and when the dialogue got to the person in charge, the head of the company in this particular case, he felt that he wanted to go with a younger voice or a younger portrayal because he felt that my portrayal of the character was basically different than what he had in his head. And I had recorded about, I don't know, 5 or 10 lines of a different character as a courtesy. So what they proposed to me was basically half the rate for far less than half the dialogue. And like I said, I did record about 10 or 15 lines, maybe up to 25 of the original character. So it wasn't that the voice was different than the audition, but in fact that they changed their mind about what they wanted for the character.
Yeah. James makes a good point as to if this was union, then you would, in this particular case, that you were cast in the role. They went through the process and cast you.
True.
And you would have been signed a union contract. You would be remunerated for that work, despite the fact that they didn't end up using it. If it's a non-union situation, it's a whole lot more fluid. It's
non-union, and James makes an excellent point for going union.
Yeah, and I'm all for creating relationships and maintaining relationships, but that doesn't mean that you kowtow to something that seems unreasonable. I think that some people respect the fact that you will stand your ground and say, listen, I did this for you. You owe me money for this, rather than just saying, well, yeah, I'll take a lesser rate because you didn't use what we originally agreed to. I think that's a little bit ludicrous. That's only my feeling. I think you should be paid or fairly compensated for the work you have done, whether you're union or non-union.
I don't believe that I was unfairly remunerated for the work I ended up doing. So I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I'm not weak when it comes to negotiation. But also, on the flip side, I also wanted to develop that relationship with the company as well.
Yeah, but it's one hand and the other. I mean, it's maintaining the relationship, but also letting them know that you will not be taken advantage of. It's a professional relationship, and that is being professional. Just accepting, circumstances, saying that, well, we went with another way. Yeah, but I recorded this for you, and I think I should be fairly compensated for what I did give you. Whether you changed your mind about whether you're going to use me or not.
To me, James, I think that the production company did a pretty good job. I mean, they always had the ability to just cut them loose completely and say, you know what, we've changed our mind. We're not going to go in this direction. We'll pay you some tiny little amount, and thanks very much. But they did go out of their way to find him another character.
Yeah, I want to make it clear. I did another character, which was a meager thing, about 5 lines, and I did not do half of the original character. So, and they paid me a full half of the rate we had agreed upon. So I feel I was fairly remunerated, and I don't think there were any hard feelings across the board. Yes, I'm disappointed I didn't get the full rate, I'm disappointed I didn't get the full character, but again, I feel I was fairly compensated.
Well, in that
Okay, I'll buy that.
sounds like you answered your own question, is that you probably were treated fairly in this particular circumstance. You've maintained the relationship with the production company, and there's every chance you'll get another role from them. So I would laugh all the way to the bank, cash the check, and move on to the next project.
I think you're right. And James and Steve and everyone else, thank you. I appreciate your input.
A question from John that he sent to me via the chat window. Using brand names in demos, there's two schools of thought. One is, yeah, go ahead and use big brand names in your demos, and just to prove that you can handle that type of work. The other school of thought is don't use them, because you might run into legal issues, or you're going to be compared with if you're going to use a Lexus spot, you're going to be compared automatically with, the talent that did the real Lexus spot. Anybody have any thoughts on whether or not to use real brand names in your commercial demos? Using brand names in demos, yes or no? Do you go ahead and use big brand names, or do you do your best to write the copy in such a way that you impart the feeling of some of these big brands, but you're not actually mentioning the brand itself?
I would say go ahead. I mean, there's something of called fair use. You're not selling the product, you're selling yourself, you're selling your services. So as long as you're not selling the product, or I think fair use is fine to use name brands. The other thing too is not to use something that somebody's doing. Say Sam Elliott does Coors, and he does Ram, and he does some other things. You wouldn't want to put those things on your demo because they're too identifiable with Sam Elliott. But I have them on my demos. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, James, is that in many cases on my particular commercial demo, because I've been doing this a little while, the segments in my commercial demo are cut from real spots. So I do a spot for Kia Optima cars, which was a national TV spot here in Canada, but I really did the spot. So I feel very comfortable using Kia, in the commercial demo. But I do think that your advice with regards to legal implications is perfectly fair. I mean, I think that if some company wanted to get really jerky about it, that they would possibly send you a cease and desist letter. Or I have never once heard of a voice actor, and I've spoken to literally thousands of voice actors over the last 7 or 8 years in my various roles in the voiceover business. I have never once heard of a voice actor being approached by a brand saying, we heard your demo and you're using our brand in your demo, and we want you to not do that. Not once have I heard of that. I have heard of some situations where voice actors have been asked to remove corporate logos from their websites. So if you did a project for Coca-Cola 3 years ago, and you here's my client list, and you have a big Coca-Cola logo on your website, that's not okay usually. And I have heard of voice actors getting in, minor trouble for that, just being asked to remove it.
Especially if you've done Coke and then you've been released from it because the spots no longer run, and then you did a Pepsi commercial. They wouldn't be happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Or there's certainly other situations as well where someone puts up, my client list includes Coca-Cola. Well, you did one e-learning program for them 7 years ago. I mean, certainly the inference when you put a big Coca-Cola logo up on your website that, Coca-Cola is one of my clients, that you've done some sort of big national or regional TV spot for them, not, one e-learning project. So those are the kind of situations I'd be concerned about. But
now, on your demo, did you actually get permission from Kia to use that, or did you just not bother because you'd done it already?
I didn't. Once it was released into the public domain, but once it aired, I did as a courtesy ask the production company that I did it was the agency. I asked the agency, "Hey, do you mind if I put this on my reel?" And they didn't have any objection to it.
Yeah, and usually they won't. I mean, if you've done something and you just say, "Hey, you mind if I use this?" Usually they'll say fine.
Absolutely. I've never heard of anything of it. I've never heard of anyone getting in trouble for using brand names in their commercial demo. Not once. And I certainly think that if you do a commercial demo that doesn't mention a single brand name through the entire 60 seconds, it's going to sound weird. It's going to sound like it was a custom written bunch of copy for a demo purpose rather than real spots. And your demo is supposed to sound as close to real spots as you can possibly make it. Blair is asking, how effective do you think hosting your own podcast is for finding new clients? That's an interesting question because there's a lot of voice actors out there who have their own podcasts, and they interview other voice actors. And I find this interesting because I tend to believe all we're doing is talking to ourselves and that our clients aren't really paying much attention to our podcasts. But I don't know that for sure. And I'm curious to know if anyone else has any thoughts on this. Is it effective at all? Does anyone online here tonight have their own podcast, and does it work for you? I'm just going to go back and try and unmute some people here. This is a bit of a tedious process because I have to do it one at a time. Okay, there we go. Eric asks, Graham, did you get that in writing? I think that you're referring to the permission from the agency with regards to using the Kia spot. Nope, didn't get it in writing. Didn't even bother getting an email trail follow up. You know what it was is that I had gone in to record some tags maybe 6 weeks later, and I asked them live while I was with them in the studio, hey, is it okay if I use that spot I did 6 weeks ago? And they said, yeah, sure, go ahead. But that was it. I didn't get any sort of legal confirmation other than that.
Hi, Graham. This is Anthea.
Anthea, how are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
I don't know on this podcast thing, but I think it's an interesting avenue. At this time, my husband does the Babylon 5 Project podcast. It's a real tongue twister. And I have done the intros for him. And I've gotten some mentions, but for the most part, I just do the intro portion, and then they do their thing, and I do the voice of the computer, and then I do their ending. And I haven't really gotten noticed for work from it, It's been going on for a couple of years, but the podcast itself was, I think the word, it was nominated for that, I can't even remember is it Parsec Award? It was actually nominated, but it didn't win.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't really gotten any business off that, but we haven't really explored it to the full extent. I just kind of wanted to, not quite sure, but it's interesting.
Yeah, like I look at like just even hosting OpenMicVO, and of course, before I was doing this, I was hosting Talk Time for Edge Studio. So I've been doing this now for 3 or 4 years, and I can't think of a single client that I have been referred to or landed as a result of my efforts on Sunday evenings at hosting this little show. I do it just because I want to give back to the voiceover community. I'm not convinced that hosting something like this or hosting a podcast, particularly if it's a podcast about voiceover that's largely directed to other voice actors, I just am not convinced that it's going to get you very far from a business development standpoint. When I think about the investment you have to make in it in order to complete a quality project every week or every couple of weeks and post a new episode, for the amount of effort that you'd have to expend to do that, I'd have to think that a similar amount of effort or time in some other business development activity, like cold calls or something like that, would be more successful. Who else has got some questions for us tonight? We're talking about business development tonight. Anything to do with getting more voiceover business, so online casting sites, agents, and relationships with agents, using LinkedIn or other social media. Who's got some questions for us tonight about getting more voiceover work?
Hi, Graham. This is Eric. How you doing this evening?
Hey, Eric.
Question. I've been in learning the way the game is played in the voiceover industry for almost 3 years now. Got some training, thinking about getting the website going and all that good stuff. Start the business. Coming into through the transition of the other play-to-play company that apparently shocked the voiceover world. And I'm hearing a lot more. Actors are starting to go back to the old school of cold calling, going directly to the client. What do you think is the best approach to going directly to clients? Emails, cold calling, or simply sending letters? I mean, I know letters is old school, but any best practice to communicating with clients that are out there?
Well, I'm going to give a plug for a webinar that I participated in about 6 weeks ago by Actors Sound Advice. If you do go to voiceoverinfo.com, and there was a webinar that we did that talked about how to get an agent. And there was a very specific process that we outlined in this how to get an agent webinar that is just as applicable when it comes to getting clients. And it's kind of a combination of sending out emails, sending out postcards, like actual old school snail mail postcards with your brand on them, and then maybe just a quick brief note on the message side, because so few people get physical mail anymore. When something does land in your mailbox, like a postcard, it stands out. So, I would recommend, and I'm not saying this just because I was involved in it, as a moderator, the webinar that we did on how to get an agent is really well worth the investment when it comes to business development in general, not just developing agent relationships, but developing relationships, with anyone that can possibly give you business.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Hi, Graham.
Hello, Haley.
I thought I would jump in because my question kind of segues a little bit with Eric's question. I am at a stage in my voiceover business. I'm wondering about the value and the importance of investing in branding yourself really, really well. So I'm at the stage where I've invested a lot in training, working on the demos at the moment that will be, used for marketing on the website and that kind of thing. But I've touched base with a company in my local area with regards to branding and putting together a very consistent model. So when I am at the stage and ready to contact agents and basically reaching out, I kind of want to launch myself and come out of the gate looking organized, prepared, professional, and easy to work with. So I'm wondering about the value of investing in branding yourself.
There's really two schools of thought in this area of branding. And there are many voice actors that are incredibly successful that have never put more than 30 seconds of thought to the idea of their personal brand. And they just haven't done any work in that area. On the other hand, there are voice actors who have worked hard on developing their personal brand and have ridden their personal branding all the way to the bank. And one of them, and he happens to be on the webinar with us tonight, is Doug Turkel. And Doug is a very talented voice actor based in Florida. And Doug is, he's got a great voice. He's got a great natural, everyday guy delivery. But I don't think that Doug would be offended if I said that he doesn't have the deepest, movie trailer-ish voice. So what he did is he developed an entire branding campaign around the theme of him being the unnouncer, not the announcer, the unnouncer. And it is, I would think that it's probably the most successful branding campaign of any voice actor that I know of. And that's been Doug's branding now for many years, at least 6 or 7 years that I know of, and it could very well go back longer than that. Doug, if you want to pop in, you're certainly welcome to. But it has been incredibly successful for him because he's positioned himself very specifically as the guy to read those scripts that say at the top, how they always have the specs for them, what they're looking for. No announcers. We don't want any announcers on this script. Well, Doug, by branding himself the unnouncer, is a shoo-in for those when he auditions for them.
Yeah, I would pop in and say something, Graham, but I'd rather just hear you say nice things about me.
Well, Doug, I think highly of your work in general and of your branding specifically. So it's always been an example I've used of great branding. So do I think it's possible, getting back to the original question, do I think it's possible to have a successful voiceover career without really investing a lot in a personal brand, so to speak? Yes. And I think that there are many, many voice actors out there who have done so. But I also think that those voice actors who do a really great job of developing a brand in a very specific niche and then really, really pounding away at that brand and really owning that little niche, or in Doug's particular situation, what is a very large niche, which is people that don't want the big, deep announcer sound. you know, these people have been very, very successful. Another guy I think of is also based out of Florida, if I remember right. His name is Ed Victor, and Ed is the opposite of Doug Turkel. Is that Ed is the big radio voice. He's the big, you know, the big movie trailers, the big action, you know, big truck ads, that kind of stuff. And he branded himself the big gun, and he used a shotgun mic as, you know, he had a very clever graphic designer work with him, and he had a revolver, but the barrel of the revolver actually was a shotgun microphone. It was a very clever, very well done branding campaign. If you happen to be at your computer right now, I certainly invite you to go to, you know, look up Ed Victor voice actor, and his big gun branding. I've always thought was very strong. Mind you, when it comes to Doug has done a great job of not pigeonholing himself. The thing about Ed Victor, when he brands himself as the big gun, is that he really does limit his opportunities to those voiceover applications that require the big, deep voice. But then he's made a very good living being the big voice, the big, deep voice. So it's worked out well for him.
In the last couple of years, Ed has actually changed his branding. The big gun did work for him for a long time. His change predates today's political climate, which I think would have forced him to change it anyway, maybe, or he would have considered it at least.
Yeah.
But if I can just go back and add a couple things to your excellent answer about how important branding is or is not. It gives me the chance to come up with my favorite answer, which is it depends, because it really does. It depends on where you're getting your work. So the first question to ask is, who am I going to be marketing to, or how am I going to be looking for jobs? If you mostly get jobs on the pay-to-play sites, branding is probably completely ineffective, because all those potential clients ever see is your name. Once you take those clients off the site, maybe it would have some more benefits. Also, if you're reaching out directly to potential clients and or agents, I think in those cases, branding makes a lot of sense, because the way I like to explain it is that branding gives you a chance to teach people when to hire you, when to come to you, what they should be expecting when they listen to your demo, when they end up on your website, when they receive your marketing, and you teach them when to reach out to you. Every time they need someone who does what you do, if you're well branded, they should remember you. And if you've marketed yourself strongly and consistently, then you have a really good chance of being on their shortlist. And that's a rare place for a lot of people to be, because like you said a few minutes ago, a lot of people just aren't sending physical mail. I think to a large degree, a lot of talent are not marketing themselves directly to people who can hire them. I always recommend that people focus less on getting auditions and more on getting jobs. That has nothing to do with agents, by the way. Get all the auditions you can from agents. The best place to get them. But the people who spend a lot of their time reaching out to people who can get them auditions, such as the pay-to-play sites, for one example, I think spin their wheels a lot. The people who spend time reaching out to people who can hire them directly have a much better return on their marketing investment.
So here's a follow-up question. With branding, is it possible to have a brand if you are a baby at voice actor? If you've been doing training and getting better, but you still don't necessarily know what you are best at. You may know who you are as a person and what you can bring as far as your personality, but if you don't know exactly where that fits and how that jives and how that translates, can you still develop a brand when you're brand new, or should you wait to even try it until you feel like you know your niche?
Well, if you're asking me, Joy, I would say you absolutely can. And I would say you absolutely should, because you can always change it down the road. But your branding doesn't have to be focused on exactly what you sound like. It can be personality based. If you're a fun, happy, energetic, bright sounding voice, then you could focus on that. If you work a lot in a particular area of voiceover, if you do a lot of medical narration or audiobooks, your branding could be focused on the type of work that you get. There are a lot of different ways to approach your branding. And I know your question made it seem like you're worried that it would end up being too general at this point, but there is something about what you do that would make people want to hire you. And you can use that as the focal point of your branding, to the point where if beginners can be really effective with their branding, because even though you're new at this, if you're good enough to book the work, then you're good enough to, well, sort of, if you're good enough to book the work, you're good enough to be hired to do the work. So as long as you're good enough to be hired, if you're well branded, it makes it easier for people to hire you. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, thank you.
So Doug, I've got a follow-up question for you then. How easy is it for someone like Joy, who, if she establishes herself with a particular brand, is it possible to change your brand or evolve your brand over time as she settles in more comfortably to a particular niche or to a particular style of delivery?
Yeah, I think it's very easy, actually. Nobody's keeping track. Nobody is going to get new branding from you and think, hey, wait a second, these two sentences changed and now she's focused more on X instead of Y. They'll just, for the most part, take it at face value so that it allows you to evolve. I think everyone's branding should evolve as they figure out what it is that they enjoy doing best, what it is that they get hired for the most, what it is that makes them unique. All of those things will inform your branding as you move forward. But do something in the beginning that makes it easy for people to sort of categorize you so they know where to look for you and what you are best at. That also makes it easier to find potential clients, because you know who are the people who are hiring for what you do. It also makes it easier for you to write your marketing materials so that they appeal to those exact people.
Do you ever worry, Doug, about excluding? I mean, everybody always seems to want to try and be everything to everybody. Do you worry about, when you write your materials in a certain way to appeal to a certain type of customer, that you're walking away from business that you could have had if your branding had been more generic? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, completely. And no, I don't worry about that at all, for a number of reasons. First of all, the more specific you are, the more likely it is that you'll get all of the work for people who do that. And if you can get all of the work in, or a good portion of the work in, any one niche, you're getting a lot of work. So you don't have to worry about what you're missing out on. Secondly, if you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to no one. Because if you've ever run across a voice actor's website where they list, I'm great, I specialize in 11 different kinds of voiceover. First of all, nobody's going to believe you. You can't specialize in all of those things. So any client who does one of those 11 things is going to think, oh yeah, maybe that's something they do. But if you specialize in medical narration and they end up on the page of your site that is voiceover.com/medical narration, and everything on that page is written in their lingo, it shows an understanding, it shows that you have an understanding of their industry. You use big words like methyl tetrahydrofolate, polyalkyl cyanoacrylate in your demos, so they know that you can say those things. And instantly, you become an expert in that thing. So not only will they hire you, but they're going to recommend you to other people in their industry who need this expert that they just found. So no, I don't worry about being too specific. because not only does it help me find those clients, it also gives me the chance to be that specific in a number of different areas. I can have one page on my site that appeals to medical narration, one that appeals to explainer videos, one that appeals to audiobooks. And when I market to each of those verticals, I only send them the link to that page. So you can be specific in a lot of different areas rather than being general in all of them.
Doug, as always, I'm so appreciative when you join us here on OpenMicVO, because your guidance is priceless. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here tonight.
Yeah, good to be here as always.
Fantastic. A question from Steve. A pretty famous longtime VO actor and coach says that he gets a lot of work from Craigslist and highly recommends that new actors use Craigslist to find work. Does anybody have any experience with using CL or Craigslist for getting work? That's a good question. You know, I would have tended to have completely dismissed Craigslist, but I have heard some anecdotal stories about people finding big jobs there. Does anybody have any thoughts on Craigslist or have any experience with using Craigslist in order to find jobs?
Hi, Graham. This is Eric.
Hey, Eric.
I went and tried it. I went online and filtered out certain cities. And I found that a couple of these Craigslist voiceover offers were linked to pay-to-play sites. They sent back a link to log on and register, and it was going to be free for so many days, or some sort of casting company that was wanted you to pay so much a month. I've never got a hit from an actual client to audition for a job, so I kind of like back off from there. But hey, listen, really quick. How much research should I do for a client if I'm going to market out to them about that client? Do I need to know something about that client when I reach out to them? We can answer that later on after this question. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Okay, well, I think we have two good questions then on the table right now. There's one about using Craigslist to find new VO work. And the second one is, how much research should you do prior to approaching a new client? Eric, with regards to your second question, I will always, at the very least, go to the client's website and make sure I understand exactly what it is that they do. Try and find names of, most small agencies, most small production companies will give you a list of personnel and titles on their websites. The other thing they always have is a reel of their work. So, I think it's important that you're able to say, if it should come up, if you do have a chance to talk to someone who's in a casting position, hey, I saw that great spot you did for Chipotle, and that voiceover was really well cast, and that's the same kind of stuff that I do. So maybe you might want to keep me in mind. And I don't know what crap you're going to make up to say to them, but indicating that you've at least been to their site and are familiar with their work will go a long way towards getting you on a consideration list when it comes to casting potentials.
Hi. Sorry.
Go ahead, Anthea.
There you go. I'm not unmuted, right?
No, go ahead.
Okay. My computer did a kind of a glitch thing. The question I have, if say you're going to a company and you're looking into doing some work with e-learning and the kind of, my husband's with like a medical device industry. So they have different machines that have to say different things like impending shock, step away, or that sort of work. So my question is, who do you approach about this? Do you head to the human resources department? Do you head for someone higher like the CEO, or it's what person within a company do you want to speak to?
What person is it within a company you want to speak to with regards to doing research or getting work? I just make sure I
Getting work.
Getting work. Okay. My approach has always been to find who the decision maker is when it comes to casting jobs, and that position is going to be producer, casting director. In smaller companies, it might be a writer. And then I find who is it that fields their inquiries? Who's their administrative assistant? Or maybe it's the receptionist. That in small companies, it might very well be the receptionist that is most often responsible for screening stuff that gets through to the producer or the casting director or whomever. And then I work on that person first, so that I've got an ally within that company before trying to actually get my stuff in front of the casting director. It's always going to be a whole lot easier if the casting director's assistant says, "Hey, I checked this guy out. He seems like he's got some pretty good stuff under his belt, and maybe we want to consider putting him on our on an audition list for something coming up." If the assistant comes in with that recommendation, it's going to go a lot further than you just kind of calling out of the blue and trying to get through directly to the casting director right off the top. But I'm sure that there's others out there who have different opinions, and I'm really curious to hear them. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? So 3 questions on the table right now. We're still looking for people with experience using Craigslist in order to develop new business. The second question is, how much research should someone do on a prospective new client before really, seriously approaching them? And then the third question is, who within the new prospective client is it you want to get close to in order to try and get work from that client?
Graham, I'll back up a few steps back to the Craigslist question.
Fantastic.
I've used Craigslist quite a bit. It is it's a daunting task, but one of the benefits of using Craigslist is, of course, if you do the searches correctly, you can search worldwide, so you're not locked into any region or town or state. However, the other comment I wanted to make was that when you do find work, I've run into the same thing that Eric described, and of course a lot of people trying to take money from you. But when I have gotten work, they've been, I would have to say, every project I've ever gotten from Craigslist was indie or small. I've been on a couple of apps, and then some other people just looking for private things like, a character voice for a happy birthday message or things like that. So you're not going to make a mint, but there is some work out there.
Now, you say that you have used, how to go about doing searches that are broader than just one specific market, like broader than just newyork.craigslist.org.
Correct.
What tools are you using in order to do those broader searches?
Google. Just Google. You can be specific, like you said, newyork.craigslist.org, but in Google, you simply put in Craigslist, and then you start throwing out the terms: voiceover, voice actor, voice needed, voiceover wanted, voice space over, voice hyphen over, voiceover as one word, voice actor, voice acting. It gets tedious. That's why I said there's a large you know, there's a lot of work involved in it and not a lot of payoff, but I know there have been people who've gotten some big jobs out of it.
Fantastic. And so if you had to give an assessment of your overall experience with Craigslist, would you say it's been a positive experience?
You know, I don't make it a primary concern. In other words, when I have a few free minutes throughout my day, I will jump on and do it. So yeah, I think overall it's positive, but as I said, don't make it your primary focus because it's very difficult.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, JD. That's great info. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Fantastic. We've got time to slip in one or two more questions before we call it a night tonight. Who else has got a question for us with regards to developing new business, getting new work as a voice actor, casting sites, agent relationships? Who's got a question for us? Business development.
Hi, Graham. I just wanted to say that I think a lot of people, especially newer people, get inundated with, oh, you've got to get your brand, and you've got to do this, and you've got to do that, and I think a lot of them forget that they really need to work on their craft and work on their performance. And so, to those who are just kind of starting out, yeah, it's important to have a website, a nice, clean-looking, website that's easily accessible. But I think there are quite a few people out there who are willing to sell them all sorts of marketing packages and everything else. And my best advice would be focus on your performance and hone your performance. And the other stuff can come later. Have a decent, clean-looking website, so when you do submit to agents, they have somewhere to go to look at your demos and so on and so forth. But I would really, my focus would be more on performance initially than concerning about marketing yourself or branding yourself. That sort of kind of comes naturally, because once you start booking, you're going to see where you're booking and where your strengths are, and that's when you can really focus in on marketing in that area.
I think that's a fair comment, Lynn, for sure.
Yep.
I think that it's easy for all of us to get caught up in buying equipment or coming up with elaborate marketing plans without giving appropriate focus to the craft itself. And I think that a voice actor who delivers phenomenal performances but only has okay marketing is going to be more successful than a voice actor with phenomenal marketing but only delivers okay performances. So I think that your point is well taken. And it's actually probably a good message to end tonight's OpenMicVO on. Thank you all so much for your participation tonight. I think we've had a really good session. Don't forget that this will be posted to YouTube if you want to go back and review at all any of the information that we spoke about. And the chat transcript will be in the show notes at the YouTube posting. So thank you very much for your participation tonight. Have a great week. Audition lots and book lots of work. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, Graham.